watching this tutorial. It shows you our API Token Authentication app, which brings the API token concept to Jira and Confluence. It gives you a lot more admin control over which users can create API tokens and what they use them for. So it increases your control over the REST API, and it also avoids the use of essentially the user's password via Basic Auth, which is a relatively insecure way. And thirdly, on single sign-on environments, it actually helps you to overcome the challenge that users might actually not have a password in the local Jira or Confluence database. So let's get started. I'm on my Jira demo instance, I'm already in Manage Apps, as you can see, and search for API Token Resolution. And I'm just gonna click here, free trial. So it's gonna install the app. So we've seen that many times before. We'll skip through that quite quickly. Yes, I want to get a license. Accept the terms, generate license, and apply the license. Normal way how you would do any or start any evaluation. Once you install it, it goes into the get it started wizard. So I'm going to start there. I'm not going to spend too much time on the wizard itself, mostly clicking through the default options and explaining them a little bit. And then we get started with the default options afterwards, and then we go back into the configuration so that you can get a better idea of what's possible with the app and how that affects you. So next. So the first question is about if you want to disable basic authentication on the REST API. So basic authentication is with your normal username and password. So our plugin can actually disable that so that afterwards only the authentication on the REST API with a username and the token instead of the password is possible. So that's very often used because that's very often part of the reason why you install this app, to make it more secure. So a lot of our customers do actually disable the basic authentication. I'll leave it on for the moment, but we'll play around with that later. So I'm going to go to next. Now it asks us about permissions, and we have 3 levels of permissions. The first one is where the app asks which users should be able to create tokens for themselves. Yeah, by default it would mean all users can create tokens for themselves. I'll leave that, and I'll give you some examples of combinations that you can set later. The next permission is which users should be able to create API tokens for other users, and by default we only allow Jira administrators that. You could also set it to no one or other groups of users. Again, we'll stick with the default option for the moment. And the third permission is which users should be able to use API tokens. And again, by default we allow every user who has a token to actually use the token. You already get the idea that you can combine those to very specific use cases. So from every user can create and use a token to only certain people can create tokens, but everyone can use it, etc. So you can get actually with a combination of those 3 options to a relatively granular permission level, which I'm going to show you an example later. Let's do next. Now it's about token expiration. So our tokens can have a expiration date, and here as an admin in this wizard you set what the maximum allowed token duration is. So if I would set that to 2 years here, for example, then users can only choose durations up till 2 years. Again, I'll leave that on forever for the moment. Next. And the last thing is giving you a nice message that you could post in an email or on Slack, telling your users that you've installed this app. So next, and save and create a token. Now we're actually getting to the token manager interface of our app. A normal user will only see this My API token. In terms of, for you as an admin, you have the token manager, the permission settings, and some other system-wide settings as well. So let's just do the simple thing, create a token and actually use it. let's say new API token. You can give it a description, Zapier admin token, and we want this to be valid for a year, and then I can say create API token, and I can copy it. So this is the actual token, and the important thing is this is the only time you see it. So if you save it in your password safe or wherever you have it copied out of there, we don't save the token in clear text in the database, so there's no way to get back to this clear text representation that you need after this screen. So I'm going to copy it, close it, and I'm gonna just put it here in Code Runner. It's my admin token, and I have it here. And the best practice here really is create a token per use case. So don't just create one token and use it for all your 15 scripts and 3 or 4 services. Really create a token per use case. That makes it much easier if you have to revoke it at a future point because you don't use that script anymore, or that service got hacked, whatever it is, then you don't have to change it in all places. It's one of the beauties of API tokens, to be able to actually have multiple of them. So let's jump over to my Zapier account. Just gonna show and demonstrate things are working. So that's my Zapier account. Under my apps, let's find a Jira server app and connect that. Yes, so my username is admin, and instead of my normal password, I now put the token in here. And that's the beauty of the API token app. So it works with all normal integrations that are username, password, basic authentication based. And you just use the token instead of the actual password. And then I need the base URL. I've saved that here already. And here, yes, continue. So set up, let's test this, and it's successful. So now I could access all the Jira functionality that Zapier supports to create integrations. The rest of the demos, I'm going to jump to the command line and use curl, which you probably are familiar with, to show you some examples. But I also wanted to show you one of the very popular third-party services that you may consider using. So let's go back here. Relatively simple. We have our token manager here. If I go to the next tab, again, that's only available to you as an admin user. And here you see all the tokens that have been created in your instance. So you see the user that created the token, that created the token, but the user that actually this token belongs to. Then the description that the token was created with, when it was created, when it was last used, also when it expires, and you can also delete here. And with the filters, you can actually see there's lots of filter options that you can hear. This is also the place in the UI where you can actually create a token on behalf of a user. Remember, you had, as an admin, you have the right as a default that we left on default settings. So if I take my user CR now, I can actually use this command line token for CR. Let's say it's only valid for create a token. I can copy it now, put it back on my code runner, that I don't forget it. CR. And there you see that's the token. Close it. So this is how I, as an admin or as a user of the group who is allowed to create tokens on behalf of other users, I can actually create those tokens. And let's just try to use it. So here's my command line. Let's actually, here's my curl command minus use the user. You can see this is actually using the user's password currently, because I'm going to show you that fails later on when I toggle other settings. So I'm gonna put in the token here, content application, JSON, and then I fire it off against the API call for myself. So that gives me information about the user who I'm logged in with, which is quite useful when testing tokens. And then I run it through the Python pretty print for JSON that actually looks good when it goes to command line. So I'm going to fire it off. And you see I'm going to get this JSON plot back, and you see it actually takes me as the user Christian Reichert with my email address, username CR. That's the user I created the token for, so I used it here, and I'm correctly identified as that user and successfully authenticated. Otherwise I couldn't have pulled this REST request. So let's next go again a little bit through permissions. And like I said, these are the default permissions that the app suggests. The first one is the use token permission. Allow everyone to use tokens. So if I uncheck that, I can actually start to be relatively granular. For example, Jira core users are allowed to use the tokens, etc. Then I can determine who can create tokens for themselves. And again, here I could have a group like Jira administrators, and then also the create token on behalf permission for Jira administrators. So this would be a setting, for example, if I want to control that only administrators can create their own tokens, and they can also create tokens for other users. So the users can't create the tokens themselves, but once I as an admin gave them a token, they can actually use it because they have the use token permission. Yeah, so you get the idea that with combining this, you can actually get quite a good granular level of control over the usage of your API. Let's check some of the system-wide settings that are available. The first thing is the maximum validity time. I already explained that. So what users can choose, or when you create a token, what's the maximum lifetime you can choose. By default it's never, so that it never expires. When creating the token, you can still choose a smaller expiry, so this only sets the maximum. Then the next thing is to restrict the API token based on an IP address range. So if you add a address range here, 192.168, let's say 0.0/24 for Class C network. If you set an IP address range here, then tokens can only be used from this address range. So this is, for example, great if you want to restrict the API usage or the token usage to your internal network only, or to a set of servers. So for example, the data center network that you're in. Let me just demonstrate that. So I'm gonna save this, and this is not a network we use. So if I try to use my token here again, you see no JSON object could be decoded. Let me actually remove the pretty print, and then you'll see that we are getting a long document here, A43 forbidden. So that actually, like I said, restricts from which IP address ranges they can. In terms of if you're running your Jira behind a reverse proxy, then obviously all the connections come via the reverse proxy. So in that case, we need to read the original source IP address, not from the connection source IP address. We need to read it via proxy parameter. And so if you are behind a reverse proxy, we may have to turn this on. And then it's very often something like x forwarded for or x real IP. That's what you need to look into your proxy settings this. You can also add an IP address to limit the which reverse proxy you're trusting. So you could say if that's your reverse proxy, you put that in here, and then tell us which header the original client IP address is from, and then that client IP address is going to get checked against this allowed IP address range. Hope that explanation made sense. Let me disable that again, that I could actually do everything here again. The last setting I'm going to show you is the password authentication. So to disable basic authentication with username and password. So let's do that. That means when I now do a request on the REST API with a basic authorization header, so username, password in the authorization header, that will work if you use a token. It will fail if you use a username and a user's password. And I'm going to demonstrate that to you. So let's go back to my terminal, and here's my request together with a token. So that should still succeed. Let me just show that quickly to you. It did. I get my unformatted JSON back here, but you can see it's me as a user. Now let's try the same request with my user's password in there. For this demo instance, the user's password is insecure. So I'll try this now, and you see I do get a 401 unauthorized back. So just quickly go here again, uncheck this and save this. Then both would be possible, using API tokens, but also using the original user's password. So let's try again with my password here. I'll do this, and you see I get the same JSON block back. So I could easily show you here that it works blocking the normal username password authentication on the REST API if you wish to do that. That's pretty much the feature set as it stands for the API Token Authentication app. In the next release, just as a small teaser, we'll have the capability to scoping tokens. So think of making a token read-only as opposed to being able to do read-write. And there's a lot more coming down the line. Also some nice audit logging. By the way, worth mentioning is also, and if you go to the support tab here, you have all the documentation. For example, the REST API documentation. So our plugin actually does have a REST API. So everything I showed you in the UI, you can do via the REST API too, including creating tokens on behalf of users. So we have some customers who nicely automated this with approval processes and then create those tokens via the API. So especially if you deploy that in big instances, that might be very, very useful for you. All right, thanks for watching this and have a great day.